If you were leading the largest slave revolt against Rome, why on earth would you kill your own horse right before the final battle? Well, picture this. It's 71 BC, and we're standing at the Salarius River in southern Italy. Spartacus, commanding an entire army of escaped gladiators and slaves, is finally cornered by 6 Roman legions. In full view of his men, he calmly brings his horse to the front lines, draws his sword, and strikes it down. He declared that if he won, he'd have plenty of Roman horses to choose from. And if he lost, well, he wouldn't need one anyway. Spartacus fought that day until a spear literally forced him to one knee, battling it out until the bitter, bloody end. This legendary gesture sets the stage perfectly, because in the world of the Roman arena, you weren't just fighting to survive, you were fighting for ultimate stakes. Today, we are completely stripping away that romanticized Hollywood myth of the glorious gladiator. Instead, we're taking a deep, descending journey into the brutal, inescapable reality of the Roman war machine. We are going to look at the real stories, the hard historical data, and the deeply tragic ends of the actual fighters who lived, fought, and died in the sand. Let's dive in. Section 1. The Price of Glory. When winning isn't enough. Okay, let's start at the absolute top tier of fighters. Imagine a 2nd century Syrian gladiator named Flamma, which translates to the flame. Now, most gladiators died within their first 5 fights, but Flamma, he survived 34 bouts. He racked up 21 victories, 9 draws, and only 4 defeats. But out of all those stats, the most staggering number in his record is that 4. Because 4 is the totally unprecedented number of times Flamma actively refused his own retirement. Flamma was repeatedly offered the rutus. That's a wooden sword that served as the ultimate prize for a gladiator. It meant permanent release from service. He could just walk away and live as a free man. Yet offered this incredible out on 4 separate occasions, he chose to feed his addiction to the roar of the arena. Ultimately, he was killed in combat on his 34th fight, just entirely unable to leave the sand behind. And here's the thing. Even if you survived long enough to become an emperor's favorite, you absolutely weren't safe. Take Emperor Nero's favorite gladiator, Spiculus. Nero literally showered this guy with massive palaces and unbelievable wealth. But when Nero's reign eventually collapsed, the Roman mob turned their explosive rage right onto his highly visible favorite. Spiculus was dragged out into the forum and crushed to death beneath a toppled statue of Nero himself. He was killed by the exact same crowd that used to cheer his name. Section 2. No honor among fighters. The arena's treachery. If you thought there was some kind of noble code of honor in the arena, the historical data tells a much, much darker story. Look at the epitaph of a 22-year-old gladiator named Herbicus. In a previous match, he had defeated an opponent and actually chosen to spare his life. But in a rematch, Herbicus lost, and that exact same opponent showed him absolutely zero compassion and executed him right there. Herbicus's memorial is a profoundly bitter warning from beyond the grave. He explicitly advises future fighters to never, ever show mercy. And Herbicus definitely wasn't an isolated case. Check out this nearly identical memorial from a fighter named Diodorus. He knocked his opponent down, and the referee officially paused the action. Naturally, Diodorus lowered his guard. But then, the referee suddenly let the opponent stand right back up and launch a fatal blindside attack. Diodorus's grave explicitly blames the referee's betrayal, which just goes to show you couldn't even trust the rules of the incredibly deadly game you were being forced to play. The entire system was completely rigged against these guys. Take a look at the champion gladiator Bado. The completely obsessed Emperor Caracalla forced him into back-to-back fights with zero rest, purely to test his absolute limits. In the morning, Bado kills his first fresh challenger. Midday rolls around, and bleeding and wounded, he miraculously defeats a second fresh fighter. But by the afternoon, he was so completely exhausted he simply couldn't lift his heavy shield anymore. A third fighter entered, and Bado was cut down. He didn't die from a lack of skill, right? He died because the circumstances were perfectly designed to guarantee his death. Section 3. Rebellion and Retribution. The Scale of Rome's Wrath. So you might be thinking, if the arena was this hopelessly rigged, why not just try to escape? Well, escaping the arena didn't mean escaping the brutality. When Spartacus's second-in-command, Crixus, was killed in battle, Spartacus staged the ultimate role reversal for his funeral. He took 300 Roman prisoners of war, armed them, and forced them to fight to the death as gladiators right around the funeral pyre. Romans who had spent their lives enslaving others were suddenly bleeding as expendable entertainment for an entire army of former slaves. But Rome's response to this rebellion was horrifyingly absolute. When General Crassus finally defeated Spartacus, he wanted to send a very clear message that no slave would ever forget. He didn't just execute the survivors on the battlefield. He ordered the brutal crucifixion of 6,000 captured men. To really put the sheer scale of that cruelty into perspective, imagine walking down the Appian Way, which was Rome's most important and well-traveled road. For 130 straight miles, Roman soldiers spaced out wooden crosses. Anyone traveling that road walked past a continuous 130-mile-long rotting monument to Rome's boundless capacity for brutal repression. Section 4. Death on their terms. Taking back agency. We finally bottomed out here with the most desperate, marginalized prisoners in the Roman system. Completely stripped of all hope, they found horrifyingly innovative ways to reclaim the only thing they had left, their own agency. In 392 AD, a politician purchased 29 Saxon warriors for an elaborate public spectacle. The night before the games, locked together in their cell, these Saxons made a collective, shocking decision. They spent the entire night strangling one another with their bare hands. By morning, every single one of them was dead, intertwined on the floor, completely denying Rome the twisted amusement of their deaths. Now, to understand why anyone would ever do something that extreme, you have to look at the alternative. It was called damnatio ad bestias. This was where prisoners were literally torn apart by wild animals for the crowd's amusement. Knowing this exact nightmare was his fate in the morning games of 64 AD, a nameless German prisoner calmly asked the guards for a brief moment of privacy in a public latrine. Inside that latrine was a xylospongium. This was a communal cleaning stick, essentially a sea sponge soaked in vinegar or salt water. This desperate prisoner took that shared sponge and violently forced it down his own throat, completely blocking his airway. He suffocated himself in a matter of minutes. He actively chose a rapid, incredibly degrading death over giving that Roman crowd the sick satisfaction of watching his suffering. Another prisoner actually orchestrated his own escape while just being transported to the arena in a heavily guarded cart. Sitting right on the edge, he feigned sleep. With every single bump in the road, he let his head drop dangerously close to the rotating wooden wheel. The guards, assuming he was just dozing off, completely ignored him. Then, at a perfectly calculated moment, he thrust his neck directly between the fast-moving spokes. The rotation instantly snapped his neck, killing him on the spot. Just hours before he was supposed to die in the sand, he took his life back into his own hands. These shocking suicides were actually recorded by the famous Roman philosopher Seneca, and he realized something really profound. These weren't just acts of despair, they were acts of ultimate defiance. He noted that human dignity and will can persist even in the most horribly oppressive, inescapable systems in human history. Even when facing absolutely certain death, a man could still completely deny Rome its power. Which leaves us with a really bitter irony to consider today. From Flama, who couldn't leave the arena even when literally handed his freedom, all the way down to the unnamed prisoners who chose suffocation over becoming a public spectacle. If the only true agency left to you in an entire system is the choice of your own horrifying end, who really won the games? I hope this deep dive really helped you understand the true heavy cost of Roman glory.